Making a name for yourself in the first-person shooter genre as a franchise is nothing short of a tall order, especially in this day and age. For decades now, there's been a couple of franchises that hold such a weight to their name that they're almost what I would consider to be household names. Franchises that even if you were to ask a non-gamer, they'd probably be able to give you a general, broad idea of what the game is about or what it is. You know, names such as Halo, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Counter-Strike, hell, even Overwatch, Fortnite, all being titles that have cemented their way into culture broadly at so many levels that it's almost impossible to picture said franchises dying. They just hold so much weight that it commands a player base, no matter the quality of the games they release, which also makes it incredibly difficult to compete against them in the first-person shooter space. As a new player on the first-person shooter block, trying to find your slice in the space that separates you from the rest represents a Herculean task. You need to create a game that not only differentiates itself enough from the titans of industry out there to avoid looking like a copycat, but you've also got to create something so compelling, so well made, yet something somewhat relatable that it needs to be enticing enough to pull players away from their favorite long-standing franchises. Something that's new and exciting, but isn't so alien that it feels like a cliff to climb. It's why we see FPS games fail more than they succeed these days. But back in 2013, a young, newly established and invigorated development team called Respawn Entertainment announced that they would be ready to take on the industry Goliaths with their brand new take on the first-person shooter genre. A game that would bring some much-needed innovation to the industry, daring to achieve things that no other game had successfully managed to achieve prior to this game. And that game was, of course, Titanfall. A game that promised to deliver asymmetric mech versus soldier combat that we'd never before seen in a multiplayer first-person shooter. A game that promised to deliver a revolutionary movement system that would change the way players engaged in combat and in map traversal. A game that had the backing of developers from the old school Call of Duty days, true veterans of the first-person shooter space. This game had a lot of things going for it, and upon its delivery to the masses, it was clear that the potential was there to be tapped into, even to the point where it got an incredibly well-received sequel with what is renowned to be one of the best single-player first-person shooter campaigns of the modern day, and one of the best multiplayer first-person shooter environments money could buy. So fast forward to today, and why is it that the only remnant or reference to this franchise in modern-day game news or development is found in Apex Legends? Today, I endeavored to answer that question. We're going to take a walk down Titanfall's memory lane, talk through its history, its successes, its blunders, its trials and tribulations, and most importantly, reflect. Reflect on how this franchise had one of the most influential and monumental effects on the first-person shooter genre, and yet it lies dormant, with no future plans for development that we know of. This is the tragic story of Titanfall. Now, to understand just how much Titanfall impacted the first-person shooter space when it came out, we need to take a bit of a stock take as to what the FPS gaming space looked like back in that era, back in the early 2010s to be exact. When you ask people of my generation, this is often revered as the golden era of first-person shooter games, where innovation was at an all-time high and franchises were staying true to their own identities. The era of Battlefield 3 and 4, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, Black Ops 2, PlanetSide 2, Far Cry 3, Insurgency, Borderlands 2, hell, even Counter-Strike Global Offensive was first released in this time window. And all of these games each brought their own special ingredient to the pool to create one of the healthiest period of first-person shooter games. At this time, Battlefield truly entered a new era by testing the limits of the Frostbite engine. Levolution was introduced to the series, progression got deeper, and gunplay got tighter. Call of Duty was arguably the best it had ever been, and was pushing the limits of the 6v6 arcade shooter standards. PlanetSide 2 showed the world that it was in fact possible to run 2,000 people on one first-person shooter server, creating the greatest sense of an all-out war to be ever captured in first-person shooter gaming. Counter-Strike Global Offensive continued to build on the groundwork laid by the series by modernizing the franchise and making it a staple in worldwide competitive gaming for 11 years. I could go on for ages, but the point being, these games were innovating in pretty big ways. First-person shooter gamers around this time were eating as bad as well as you did every time you visited Grandma for the weekend. Around every corner, there was a fresh batch of those triple chocolate chip cookies ready and waiting for you. But there was one area, despite all of this, of the first-person shooter industry that was a bit stagnant around this time. And that's not out of ill intent or laziness on behalf of the developers, but I think merely out of comfort. Comfort in that this side of their games didn't really need to take the focus away from the other mechanics they were focusing on. That being movement. The movement mechanics that these games employed. There were some quality of life changes made to what we would now consider basic movement mechanics in some of these games at the time. For example, vaulting was starting to become the norm in more titles where it previously wasn't. And it just felt like, tightening up the feel of these mechanics was the priority for the industry at the time. But there was nothing really revolutionary happening with movement beyond these mild quality of life updates. Nothing that really felt like a dive in what could be possible with movement mechanics in the first-person shooter environment. At least not in the mainstream market. Well, that was until Respawn Entertainment entered the arena with its latest party trick, Titanfall. Titanfall was announced to the world at E3 2013, and it came swinging with a focus on 3 distinct branches of game design. Revolutionizing the limits of movement in a multiplayer, arena-based first-person shooter, testing what could be achieved with asymmetric balance, and achieving a cat versus mouse system with the game's set-piece vehicles, the Titans, and translating that the multiplayer battles were part of something bigger through the introduction of AI grunts and cannon fodder into the mix. It was an ambitious project at best, one that many questioned due to the amount of risks it was taking. Surely these new movement mechanics would be cumbersome to use in a combat scenario. Surely the Titans would allow for highly skilled players to steamroll their opponents into a corner and beat the living crap out of them. All valid concerns. But when it launched and when gamers got their hands on these innovations, man, did a lot of those concerns get put to rest, and fast. Respawn came to the party in a big way here, and like a big dick in a locker room, had crafted an experience that broke a lot of the rules that other games would typically never dare to test, only to completely succeed in their application. The movement system introduced a whole slew of new mechanics such as wall running and sliding, combining with the more classic mechanics such as double jumping. This allowed for players to manipulate the maps that were carefully crafted with these movement mechanics in mind, by the way, to quickly traverse into new flanks, better positions of engagement, or to simply outmaneuver their opponent mid-firefight. It added a new layer of complexity to the very simple and very proven formula of position better and shoot better than your opponent in the arena 6v6 first-person shooter games market that we'd become so accustomed to up until now. It felt fresh, it felt new, but the most important thing here is that the skill gap that could be climbed with these new movement mechanics was both approachable but deep in nature. I remember falling in love with the game's mobility from the get-go when I first got to try it all those years ago. We'll touch a bit more on the movement system here a bit later. Just keep all of that in the back of your minds here for a moment though. But Titanfall also did the one thing that I think a lot of games were really scared to do at the time as well. It proved that you can actually have a David versus Goliath scenario in competitive first-person shooter games and still have it work out when it's balanced right. Titanfall perfectly mixed the playstyle of the small, nimble yet squishy pilots and the hefty, brimming with firepower yet slow Titans into this beautiful game of cat and mouse that let both sides of the game shine in their own ways. The game gave you the tools, the means, and the map play spaces to succeed in both stages of a match. It was honestly one of the best combined arms balances that I think has ever been struck by a first-person shooter game to date from a fun perspective. I know Battlefield has always been deemed to be be the king of combined arms gameplay, but if there was ever going to be a hot take in this video, I really do think Titanfall takes the cake for achieving the best balance between a vehicle and the infantry domain in first-person shooter gaming history, and I'm very much keen to discuss that in the comment section down below. But on top of that, and I want to really touch on this briefly as well, Titanfall was also one of the earliest games to my mind to achieve a really good PvPvE environment with the introduction of its cannon fodder AI units into matches. These little walking, breathing definitions of mediocre had one goal and one goal only: to act as a shooting gallery to the players, to keep the pace of action up, and to give players struggling with the PvP element of the game an ability to still acquire their Titan at a decent pace. And from a gameplay perspective, they actually achieved everything they set out to do in spades here. But they also did something else very important for the game too: gave it atmosphere. Titanfall required larger maps to accommodate the hulking Titans, so much so to the point where a 6v6 format in of itself would feel empty if it was PvP only. But with the AI present, it gave a sense of scale. You know, you weren't just 12 pilots and Titans dick swinging in a desolate cityscape, you were fighting in a larger war, and you were just a very small, albeit powerful part of said war. And that felt awesome. It satisfied the rule of cool every time you played it, because you were a really powerful unit in a sea of mediocre. Through these innovations, Titanfall rewrote a lot of the playbook for competitive FPS arena games, and it did so with authority. There was only one big problem with Titanfall's first attempt, and that was, it felt like a proof of concept rather than a complete game. Titanfall at its core got a lot of things right, and it also proved that a lot of the risks that it was willing to take were the right ones. But where it failed was getting the amount of content into the game that could keep players around for the long haul. Only a handful of weapons and Titans launched on day one, with extremely limited customization options, of which looked simply bare bones by comparison to what the rest of the industry was offering. With a mere few hours in the game, it started to feel like you had experienced just about everything there was to try. Beyond that, you were really just playing the game to get better at it and to continue perfecting your craft with the movement mechanics, which, don't get me wrong, bred an extremely passionate and hardcore community that was in it for the long haul. But for Joe Schmo looking for something to play and to enjoy more casually, there wasn't a lot here to keep people interested for the long run, at least not as a mainstay game in their rotation. As I said, the game was very much a proof of concept, a test run for all of these unique ideas to see if they would resonate with the core community. So when they of course did resonate with the community, there was only really one logical thing to do: enter Titanfall 2.
Stand by for Titanfall.
Get up that hill. We'll cover you.
Got you.
If Titanfall was Respawn's first swim, being nothing more than a wade in the kiddie pool, then Titanfall 2 was the full-blown Olympic-style dive into the deep end. A true all-or-nothing attempt to truly realize what this franchise could be capable of. And let me tell you folks, what a dive it was. Titanfall took everything that the first game did and dialed it to 11. The game launched with more content, more unique weapons, more maps, more Titans, more progression and game modes, the works. The movement somehow became even tighter. Respawn heard the community's feedback and actioned it to perfection. If I could really just froth this game for a second here, folks, it was one of the best multiplayer first-person shooters of the modern era. You ask anyone who was around to try Titanfall 2 in its heyday, and I think they'd have some pretty positive sentiments around this game. I don't think words can truly describe just how good this game felt to play on day one. Not only was the gameplay itself smooth and enjoyable from match to match, but it satisfied the rule of cool at every turn while not breaking the balance of the gameplay. I mean, sure, there was some pretty broken shit in this game from a balance perspective, at least when you compare it to any other first-person shooter on the market. But in a way, everything was kind of broken in its own way. Everything had the ability to just, and pardon my French here, fuck shit up in its own personal way. It really felt like nothing was overpowered because everything was overpowered. You were fighting in this war and in this universe where everything was built to send someone straight to Jesus with a one-way ticket. And the game translated that. The Titan and pilot executions were brutal, the weight of the gunplay was solid, the way in which the movement factored into gunfights. There was always an opportunity for you to feel like a badass in this game. It was intoxicating. The multiplayer side of the game was truly realized with this sequel and dialed everything to 11 exactly where it should have been. But the Titanfall 2 package didn't stop there, no. The game took the dive one step further and launched with a single-player game for the first time of the franchise's history. It was something that the community was dying to see in the first game. We wanted to learn more about the Titans, the relationship of Pilot and Titan, and the factions, the world, everything. And Respawn could have really approached the single-player campaign like, well, a lot of other games do. You know, as a checkbox, as a cookie-cutter, tick-and-flick type deal to amp up the purchase price of the game on the argument that it has more content, now give me money. But that's also not what happened here. Titanfall 2 released with one of the best single-player first-person shooter experiences to have ever existed, period. Groundbreaking level design, a mix of challenging Titan and Pilot combat, all that played heavily into each side of the game's strengths, and a story that, honestly, gets you far more invested in both your character and your Titan's character than I ever expected to, especially on my first playthrough all of those years ago.
It's just an expression, BT. It means I've been killing enemies quickly.
Understood. I have added hot streak to my vocabulary. I have had numerous hot streaks within the past 38 standard hours.
The dialogue between BT and Cooper is funny, witty, and at times a bit touching, honestly. I've been replaying the campaign in preparation for making this video, and man, it's such an absolute gem that makes this game worth picking it up on its own, especially if you can grab it on a Steam sale. There's a particular mission in this game that sees you wielding a dimension/timelight jumping wristband, and it requires you to shift pretty regularly through timelines as you complete movement puzzles and combat scenarios. It is one of the most uniquely designed levels I've ever played. Throughout the game, the campaign uses all of the different tools, weapons, Titan kits that you'll then use in the multiplayer as a linchpin for how the entire level is designed, making every level that you experience in the single-player campaign feel unique. All in all, it was the complete package, a perfect sequel of the game. And yet, the tale of Titanfall is not one of joy, it's a tragic tale, which begs the question, what the hell happened here? You know, small fourth wall break here, guys. As I write this part of the video and do my research, I only catch myself feeling more and more for the folks at Respawn who actually had a hand in getting this game into the hands of gamers. The development team rose to the task and created an incredible game. Hell, even the marketing team produced some incredible material that got the community itching to play it too. The only people who were left to come to the party was the game's publishing arm, EA Games. A name that needs no introduction to the gaming community, and one whose mere mention is enough to get some people's hairs standing on the back of their necks. All EA had to really do with Titanfall was launch it in a good release window, where competition was healthy, but not oversaturated. Titanfall was somewhat established at this point, but it was still the new kid on the block, and still had to compete with industry titans to not only capture the attention of gamers, but also hold it for the long run, to convince them that Titanfall was worthy of their time and respect in the long run. But whether it was through negligence or some kind of sabotage, EA seemed to have other plans. Titanfall 2 launched on October 28th, 2016. What seems to be a seemingly harmless Friday during the holiday season all seems normal, right? Well, this release date actually fell right between the release date for Battlefield 1 on the 21st of October 2016, another EA published title by the way, and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare on the 4th of November 2016. For that small period of time, we had a new first-person shooter game dropping every week, two of which were known industry Goliaths that regardless of their quality were always going to sell copies, and one of which was still trying to find their footing in the space and garner a community in an already competitive field. This decision sank Titanfall 2. It doomed it from the very start. Battlefield 1 was riding a high of an incredible marketing campaign, a brand new theatre of war for the franchise, and a relatively positive reception by comparison to the franchise's last foray, which was into a cops and robbers theme. And Call of Duty? Sure, it was having a rough year. Its reveal trailer ended up being one of the most disliked videos on YouTube of all time, but it's also Call of Duty. It's always going to sell. If there are three truths in this world, it's that the sun rises and sets every day, and that COD will make a yearly game that sells to an extent. EA jam-packed Titanfall's release into the mix of these two titans of industry and basically gave Respawn the good old slapstick smack on the back of the shoulder with a following "good luck kid," and that's all she wrote. Despite being well received critically and garnering a healthy reception from some players, many who may have given this game a go at launch likely stuck to their own franchises. If you only had the budget to buy one game a year in that period, especially in the lead up to the holiday period where we're all spending a ton of money on Christmas gifts, why would you take a risk on a game that you aren't sure you'll like when you know there's a good chance you'll enjoy what else is on offer elsewhere? It's, a simple risk-reward calculation, and Titanfall 2 found itself on the short end of this equation thanks to this painfully, ridiculously stupid decision to release the game. I stand by this to this day. Titanfall 2 was never given an opportunity to flourish, to build a community, to operate in a market that gave it the room to do so. It was strangled of the very oxygen that it needed to flourish. I will forever stand by that. And given that Titanfall's remnants as a franchise can only really be found in Apex Legends, the spiritual, yet some would consider bastardized successor, it stings to know that such a unique shooter with unique elements has now been morphed into a cookie-cutter battle royale by today's standards. And to be clear, before I anger the Apex Legends crowd here, I don't hate Apex Legends. It was actually one of my favorite battle royale games for a time there, and I still jump on and give it a go from time to time. But if I was to pick a favorite child here, man, I would throw Apex Legends into a pool of acid if it meant I got a Titanfall game back, without hesitation. And it's funny I say that, because the success of Apex Legends actually brought Titanfall some really solid publicity, especially in 2021. This is when Apex Legends Season 9 hit the game, and it introduced a character by the name of Valkyrie, whose origin story directly interlinked with a character that featured in the Titanfall 2 campaign. For many, it was actually a moment of realization that Titanfall actually existed in the first place, and a lot of people decided to check the game out for that reason. I actually think there was a Steam sale at the time, a really good one for that matter, which I think was just about the first time that EA did anything good for the franchise in their role as a publisher. But at around the same time, Titanfall 2's official servers were DDoSed on repeat, and once again, tragically, an opportunity for Titanfall 2 to succeed was quickly squashed, maybe even by the very people who may have enjoyed the game had they just given it a chance. Titanfall as a franchise really represented a beacon of innovation for the first-person shooter space that we had not seen for quite some time. A true standout from a gameplay perspective that achieved something that many failed to do. It rewrote the rulebook. It showed that movement could be otherworldly, yet readable and engaging in a competitive first-person shooter environment. It showed that players would adopt to the chaos, leverage it, and put it to use in ways that produce some of the most engaging PvP action that a first-person shooter could conjure. Mix that in with the David vs. Goliath gameplay and the introduction of AI to make things busy, well, it just ticked all the necessary boxes, and because of that, I don't exaggerate when I say that Titanfall's influence on the first-person shooter genre is one that I would even dare to posit to compare to the influence of the likes of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, DayZ, or even Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. PUBG took the industry by storm by arguably popularizing the Battle Royale game mode. DayZ introduced the world to the permadeath and to the PvPvE environment that put players in a survival of the fittest scenario while testing the social constructs and behaviors of human interaction, an incredible mixture of gameplay elements. And Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare introduced deeper customization mechanics to first-person shooter games and gave players the power to create classes and loadouts for the first time in a competitive first-person shooter space. Titanfall's influence, on the other hand, was improving that fresh, new movement mechanics could work in the multiplayer first-person shooter space without breaking the integrity of the game. Mechanics such as sliding, wall running, grapple hooks, swinging, a whole bunch of stuff. It was all stuff that at the time was a far fetch for multiplayer first-person shooter games while they all focused on their own thing. But ever since the launch of Titanfall, well, we really started to see new movement mechanics become a namesake or a staple across the broader industry. Was it being experimented with already at the time? Sure. Call of Duty had just started experimenting with slide functionality in 2013 with Call of Duty Ghosts, but it was rudimentary at best, something that was explored but never really built upon to be a core part of the gameplay loop for COD Ghosts. But you take a look at games that came after Titanfall, particularly things like, the following Call of Duty Black Ops titles and even the Advanced Warfare title, and things start to change. Advanced Warfare in particular, which also launched in the same year as the first Titanfall game, ended up copping a lot of flack from the community for being a possible copy-paste attempt by Activision to try and capture some of the movement mechanics captured in Titanfall, featuring things like double jump, dashing, sliding. It really did feel like an attempt to cash in on the movement shooter craze that was created by Titanfall, albeit haphazardly at best. With Respawn being predominantly made up of old Call of Duty talent at the time, some view it as a bit of a personal fuck you from Activision after seeing what Titanfall achieved. But critically, Advanced Warfare was viewed as a shell in comparison to what Titanfall offered from a movement perspective. Battlefield, Halo, Destiny, also taking bids in adopting the movement mechanics accordingly as well in their subsequent titles, or in the establishment of their franchises. And sure, while the adoption of new movement tech looked a little different between all the aforementioned franchises, I truly believe that Titanfall and the way it experimented with movement mechanics really signaled a proof of concept and eureka moment for the rest of the industry. In a way, it was kind of proof that you could not only start experimenting with movement mechanics and that the player base would adopt them, but also that it was time to start experimenting with them. Otherwise, you would get left in the dust as a franchise, potentially. And yet, we arrive at the most tragic part of all of this here, folks. The fact that despite being the best at this experimentation, the best at the execution, and it was the best at translating deep, approachable, yet hard to master movement mechanics into a competitive FPS space, Titanfall lies dormant. No opportunity to flourish, no opportunity to reach its full potential, despite paving the way for many, despite setting the scene, despite being a class above the rest. It still lies dormant. The gaming industry has unfortunately gone through a rough patch over the last few years in many ways, especially in the first-person shooter space. It's an industry that I know many will look at sometimes and go, where the hell did it all go so wrong? But to me, the tale of Titanfall is one of the industry's biggest blunders. A game so unique, so well executed, something that may have been loved by many if they had gotten the chance to experience it more. But between EA's mismanagement and radicalized community movements from third parties, the only living, actively developing remnants of Titanfall's roots are now found in other franchises and in Apex Legends. And while Apex Legends may feature the same weapons, IP, and even some of the movement mechanics at a surface level by comparison to Titanfall, it's a far fetch from the greatness that Titanfall and Titanfall 2 achieve. I can only hope that one day we see a return to this franchise and that it's given one more chance to achieve the greatness that it so deserves. But until then, folks, that is the tragic tale of Titanfall.